Greetings, traveler between worlds. Tonight, I'll be your guide on a journey that doesn't begin with a step, but with a breath. What I'm about to share isn't kept in Kami-sama's halls, nor stored in the angel's archives. It's a memory whispered by time, forgotten by gods, yet alive in the heart of the universe. They speak of a name, Master Roshi, also called the Turtle Hermit. I see you've come this far with tired eyes, like someone who's trained too hard or felt too deeply. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe you're carrying more than you should. Dreams, losses, old promises. So come, sit with me here by this fire atop the tower. The wind moves gently, and the sky seems to breathe with you. Let the warmth of the flame hold you, and let each word light a lantern inside your silence. Here, there's no rush, no battle, no demands, just stories, the kind we listen to with closed eyes, as if they were memories we haven't lived yet. Ready? Take a deep breath, let go of the weight, and come with me. The journey begins now, and maybe, by the end, you'll discover that true power was never in the Kai, but in peace. The small island where Master Roshi made his home was quiet in the early morning. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. The old master sat on his porch, legs crossed, his breathing slow and even. His sunglasses rested beside him, and his eyes, usually hidden, were open, taking in the horizon where sea met sky. Have you ever noticed how the world seems to pause between night and day? In that moment, Roshi felt neither young nor old, just present. The waves lapped at the shore with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. 300 years of life, and still, each sunrise felt like the first. Time is strange, he whispered to himself. His turtle friend was still asleep inside, and the house stood empty of visitors. No students shouting, no challenges to meet, just a man and the morning. He remembered when he first found this island, how he had stood at its center and felt something call to him. This is where you'll wait, a voice inside him had said, though for what, he hadn't known then. Now, centuries later, he understood. He had been waiting for them all, Goku, Krillin, and all the others who would come to change the world. Could it be that our purpose finds us when we're still enough to listen? Roshi closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to his own master, Mutaito. The lessons he'd learned weren't just about fighting techniques or harnessing Kai. The most important teachings were about patience, about watching the tides change, and understanding that power flows through all things, not just through fists or energy blasts. The strongest current is the one you can't see, Mutaito had told him once. It moves beneath the surface, carrying everything. As the sun climbed higher, Roshi reached for his staff, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his fingertips. How many hands had touched this staff before him? How many would touch it after? In the quiet morning, such thoughts didn't trouble him. They simply floated by like clouds, acknowledged and released. The hermit stood, his joints creaking slightly. His body might age, but something inside him remained timeless, a spark that had been there since he first learned to channel his energy. Another day, he said to the horizon, another chance to remember what matters. And what truly matters, dear listener, is it the battles won, or the mountains moved, or is it these silent moments when we truly feel alive? Master Roshi stepped off his porch and walked to the edge of the water, letting the gentle waves wash over his feet. In a world that valued strength and power, he had found something more valuable: peace in solitude, wisdom in observation, and strength in knowing when to be still. The island might be small, but it held the whole world for him, and as the morning fully bloomed around him, Master Roshi smiled, knowing that today, like every day, held lessons for those patient enough to notice them. As the day warmed around him, Master Roshi waded into the shallow waters surrounding his island. The sea was calm today, gentle, as an old friend's embrace. He looked down at his reflection, distorted by the small ripples. An old man with a white beard and sun-spotted skin. Have you ever looked at your reflection and wondered who was looking back? Roshi remembered when his beard had been black, when his muscles had been firm without effort. But he didn't yearn for those days. Each wrinkle told a story. Each spot on his skin was a day spent under the sun, training or simply being. The water around his ankles reminded him of another time, another shore. He had been young then, what humans would consider middle-aged, though for him, it had been just the beginning. He had met a young woman named Fan Fan on a beach much like this one. Her laughter had sounded like the waves, her eyes bright as the horizon. "You're that famous martial artist, aren't you?" she had asked. And he had been proud then, puffing out his chest, showing off with small bursts of clay that made the sand dance around his feet. How shallow his understanding had been, how caught up in appearances. Now, centuries later, he understood that his younger self had missed the point. The technique wasn't to impress others, but to find harmony within. "We all start somewhere," he murmured to the sea. "We all begin by misunderstanding." The turtle hermit bent down and let his hand rest on the surface of the water. It yielded to his touch, yet remained itself. Water, the element that taught patience better than any master. It carved mountains over time, yet could be held in cupped hands. Do we not all contain such contradictions? Strength and gentleness, wisdom and foolishness? Roshi thought of all his students over the years. Some had come seeking power, others fame. The best ones, like Goku, hadn't really known what they were seeking at all. They simply followed their hearts. And in their innocence, they often learned the deepest lessons. A small fish darted between Roshi's feet, its silver scales catching the sunlight. Life continuing, always moving, yet somehow always the same. The cycles that bound everything. Even the strongest current returns to the sea, his master had taught him. At the time, he'd thought it was about conservation of energy in battle. Now, he understood it was about life itself, how we all return to where we began, how every ending is also a beginning. Roshi watched as the tide began to shift, pulling away from the shore. Soon it would come back again, just as his students always returned, carrying stories of their adventures, their growth, their families, and in those moments, listening to them around his small table, Roshi felt a pride deeper than any he had known in his youth. Not pride in technique or power, but in connection, in being one small link in an endless chain of teachers and students, of givers and receivers. The water receded further, leaving wet sand that mirrored the sky. Roshi smiled at the thought that perhaps heaven was not above, but below, reflected in the simplest things, if only we took time to notice. By midday, the sun hung high above Master Roshi's island. He had retreated to the shade of his small house, a glass of cool water in his hand. On a hook near the door hung his turtle shell, the one he had worn for decades as training, the one that had shaped his body and spirit. Have you ever considered how the burdens we carry eventually become part of who we are? Roshi approached the shell, running his fingers over its smooth surface. It had been years since he'd worn it regularly. Now it served more as a reminder than as training equipment. Yet sometimes he still felt its weight on his back, even when it wasn't there. "Funny how that works," he said to the empty room. "We carry things long after we set them down." He thought of Goku, who had worn a similar shell during his early training. The boy had complained at first, but soon moved as if the shell were not there at all. Adaptation, the body's wisdom. But there were other weights, weren't there? Ones that couldn't be seen or touched. Roshi sat down in his favorite chair, feeling the afternoon heat press against the windows. He closed his eyes and remembered the weight he had carried longest, the knowledge of the evil containment, wave technique, the responsibility of being its keeper after Master Mutaito had sacrificed himself to seal away King Piccolo. For centuries, that knowledge had been both a burden and a duty, something precious and terrible, something that could save the world but take a life in return. Could it be that the heaviest things we carry are not made of matter at all? Roshi sipped his water, feeling it cool his throat. He had passed on many techniques to his students, but some he had kept to himself, not out of selfishness, but out of care. Some knowledge wasn't meant for young shoulders. Some wisdom could only be understood after years of watching the world turn. Outside, a seagull called, its voice carrying over the waves. Roshi listened to its freedom, its unburdened flight. There was a lesson there, too, about knowing when to carry weight and when to set it down. He thought of Krillin, who had come to him as a boy, carrying the weight of rejection and bullying. How that weight had shaped him, made him determined, resilient, and how, gradually, Krillin had learned to set it down, to find strength, not in resentment, but in friendship and courage. We all have our shells, Roshi murmured, and we all must learn when to wear them and when to leave them behind. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. Roshi stood and walked to the shell, lifting it with hands that had grown strong through decades of discipline. It was lighter than he remembered, or perhaps he had grown stronger than he realized. He placed it back on its hook, this simple object that had taught him so much about endurance, about moving forward despite resistance, about how strength comes not from avoiding weight, but from carrying it with purpose. The lesson of the shell was not about burden, but about intention. We choose what we carry. We decide what shapes us. And as the day continued, its gentle arc toward evening, Master Roshi returned to his chair, at peace with all he had carried and all he had set down along his long journey. As afternoon mellowed into evening, Master Roshi stepped outside once more. The air had cooled, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the eastern sky. He carried with him a small pot of tea and a single cup, setting them on the small table he kept on his porch. The ritual of tea-making was one he had practiced for centuries. The measuring, the heating, the waiting, the pouring, each step a meditation in itself. No energy blasts or powerful techniques here, just attention and care. Have you noticed how the smallest actions can carry the deepest teachings? Roshi poured the steaming tea into his cup and watched the vapor rise and disappear into the twilight air. Like thoughts, he mused, they appear, swirl, and vanish. Only by watching them, without attachment, do we learn their nature. He thought of Piccolo, of all beings, the Namekian who had once been his enemy's reincarnation, now a guardian and teacher himself. Roshi had observed how Piccolo taught young Gohan, not always with instructions or explanations, but often with silence, with presence, with example. Not every master teaches with words, Roshi said to the evening air. Some are just there, like the sky, like calm. In his long life, Roshi had spoken millions of words, had shouted instructions during training, had explained techniques until his voice grew hoarse. But looking back, he wondered if his most important lessons had been the wordless ones, the moments when his students simply watched him live according to his principles, like the time young Goku had found him meditating at dawn and had silently sat beside him, mimicking his posture without being told. No techniques were taught that morning, yet something essential had passed between them, something about patience, about listening to the world with more than ears. Roshi sipped his tea, feeling its warmth spread through his chest. The stars were brighter now, their ancient light reaching him across unimaginable distances. patient light, enduring light. Could it be that silence also trains us from within? He remembered watching Tien develop his techniques through years of solitary practice, how the three-eyed warrior had understood that some growth happens only in quietude, away from instruction or praise, how he had found his own path by listening to the voice within. As darkness settled fully around the island, Roshi finished his tea, the empty cup in his hands. Another teacher, it gave by being empty, received by having space within. So simple, yet so profound. We're all cups, he murmured, emptying and filling, emptying and filling. The most powerful teachings weren't about harnessing ki or mastering techniques. They were about understanding one's true nature, about recognizing the quiet space at the center of all movement, about finding stillness even in battle. Roshi set down his cup and looked up at the night sky, now filled with stars. How strange that after 300 years, he still found new lessons in the oldest things: tea leaves, seashells, starlight. Perhaps that was wisdom, not accumulating knowledge, but seeing the familiar with fresh eyes. And as night embraced his small island, Roshi smiled at the thought that somewhere his former students might be looking at these same stars, carrying his wordless lessons within them, passing them on in ways he might never know. Night had fully claimed the sky now, wrapping Master Roshi's island in gentle darkness. The old master sat cross-legged on the sand, his back straight but not rigid, his hands resting on his knees. The moon cast a silver light across the water, creating a path that seemed to lead to infinity. In the martial arts world, Roshi was known for his strength, his techniques, his mastery of ki. But here, alone under the stars, he practiced something different, the art of letting go. Have you ever wondered why even the strongest warriors still feel longing? Roshi closed his eyes and let his breathing find its natural rhythm, in and out, rise and fall, like the tide before him. This practice was as important to him as any fighting technique, this deliberate surrender to the moment. He thought of Vegeta, the proud Saiyan prince, who had struggled for so long with the concept of surrender, who had seen it only as defeat, as weakness. Over years, Roshi had watched from a distance as Vegeta slowly, painfully learned that some battles couldn't be won through force, that family, love, and belonging required a different kind of strength. The hardest power to master, Roshi whispered to the night, is the power to put power aside. In his youth, Roshi himself had struggled with this lesson. He had chased strength relentlessly, had pushed his body beyond limits, had sought out every technique and training method available. Always more, always further, the hunger of youth. But his master had shown him something profound one evening. Much like this one, Mutaito had stood at the edge of a cliff during a violent storm, the wind threatening to push him over the edge. Instead of fighting against it, he had relaxed his body, had bent like a reed, had let the wind move through him rather than against him, and he had remained standing when the storm passed. True strength, Mutaito had told him afterward, knows when to yield. The moonlight shifted as clouds passed overhead. Roshi felt the cool night air against his skin, accepted it, welcomed it. There was freedom in this surrender, not the surrender of giving up, but the surrender of opening up, of releasing the grip of ego and control. Could it be that what we're seeking isn't power over the world, but peace within it? He thought of all his students again, of their different journeys, how Yamcha had to surrender his fear of women to find love, how Krillin had to surrender his envy to find friendship, how even Goku, in his purest heart, had moments when he had to surrender his desire to fight and instead choose to protect. The waves continued their eternal conversation with the shore. Roshi listened not trying to understand their language, simply appreciating their voice. The universe had been speaking like this long before him, and would continue long after. There was comfort in being small, in being temporary. After centuries of life, after countless battles and trainings and teachings, Roshi had come to value these moments of quiet surrender more than any victory. This was the deeper training, learning to be still in a world that valued motion, learning to be quiet in a world that valued noise, learning to yield in a world that valued conquest. And as the night deepened around him, Master Roshi continued his practice, the most difficult and rewarding technique of all, simply being present, simply breathing, simply allowing life to flow through him like the moonlight through clouds. In this surrender, he found a strength that no training could give and no enemy could take away. Dawn was approaching, though darkness still held the world in its gentle embrace. Master Roshi had moved inside to the small room where he kept his most treasured possessions, not valuable in money, but in memory, a shelf of worn books, a collection of training weights, and photographs, moments frozen in time. In the dim light of a single candle, Roshi picked up one particular photo. It showed him with his first group of students so long ago that the photo had faded to sepia tone. Young faces looking at the camera with determination and hope. Have you ever realized how we carry pieces of everyone who has taught us? Roshi smiled at the faces in the photograph. Some had gone on to become renowned fighters. Others had lived quiet lives, away from battle. But each had carried something of his teaching with them, just as he carried something of his own master's lessons. The circle never breaks, he murmured, tracing the edge of the frame. It just grows wider. He thought of Gohan, not just Goku's son, but the old man who had found baby Goku in the woods, the kind soul who had taught the young Saiyan his first lessons about gentleness and care. Roshi had known Grandpa Gohan well, had seen how the old man passed not just techniques, but values to the boy who would one day save the world. And now, young Gohan was doing the same for his own daughter, Pan. The circle continued, widening with each generation. Could there be a greater honor than seeing your teachings live on in others? Roshi set down the photo and picked up another, this one showing Goku and Krillin as boys, standing proudly in their training jizz. How small they had been, how innocent, and how much they had taught him, though he had been the master. For that was the secret that all true teachers eventually learn. The student and master roles are fluid, constantly shifting. Sometimes the youngest soul brings the wisest insight. Sometimes the student's question teaches the master more than any ancient text. Roshi remembered the day Goku had asked him, with childlike directness, "Why do you train if you're already the strongest?" Such a simple question, yet it had made him reflect deeply on his motivations, on the nature of growth, on the journey that never truly ends. "We are all beginners every day," Roshi whispered to the pre-dawn darkness. "If we're wise enough to see it." He placed the photos back on the shelf and stood by his window, watching as the first hint of light began to soften the eastern horizon. Another day approaching, another chance to learn, to grow, to be humbled by the vast mystery of existence. In his centuries of life, Roshi had seen fashions change, technologies advance, empires rise and fall. But the essential relationship between teacher and student remained timeless. This passing of the torch, this sharing of light, and perhaps that was true immortality, not living forever in one body, but living on in the minds and hearts and actions of those who come after. Each lesson taught, each value shared, each moment of guidance becoming part of an unbroken chain stretching into a future he would never see. As the new day's light grew stronger, Master Roshi felt gratitude wash over him, for his teachers, for his students, and for the great privilege of being one small link in this eternal circle of learning and teaching, receiving and giving. Morning had fully arrived, bathing Master Roshi's island in warm golden light. The old master sat at his small kitchen table, a bowl of rice before him. His movements were deliberate as he ate, each bite taken with awareness, each moment of taste acknowledged. After centuries of life, Roshi had learned that even the simplest acts could be profound when given full attention. The space between heartbeats, the pause between breaths, these seemingly empty moments held everything. Have you ever noticed how time seems to stretch when you're truly present? Roshi set down his chopsticks and looked out the window at the blue sky. He thought of Bulma, brilliant, impatient Bulma, always rushing toward the next invention, the next adventure, how she had gradually learned, through friendship with Goku and the others, that some treasures couldn't be found by searching, only by being still enough to notice what was already there. We're all so busy looking for the extraordinary, Roshi said to the quiet room, that we miss the miracle of the ordinary. He remembered a day when Bulma had visited his island years after their first meeting. She had been between adventures, between relationships, between inventions, restless, unable to sit still. He had simply made tea and suggested they watch the sunset. "That's it?" she had asked. "That's all we're going to do?" But as the sun had painted the sky in impossible colors, as the day had surrendered to evening with grace and beauty, he had seen something shift in her expression, a recognition, an understanding that perhaps this moment, just this simple, passing, unrepeatable moment, was enough. Could it be that the spaces between our great adventures are where we truly live? Roshi stood and carried his empty bowl to the sink. The running water over his hands felt cool and alive. Another simple pleasure, another moment that could be overlooked in the rush towards something more exciting. He thought of the tournaments he had witnessed, the battles he had fought, the dramatic moments that stood out in memory. Yet equally vivid were the quiet evenings on this island, the conversations around this table, the laughter shared with friends, the space between fighting and training, the moments of simply being. Roshi dried his hands and walked outside, feeling the morning sun warm on his skin. A small bird landed nearby, watching him with bright eyes before pecking at the ground, life continuing in its unhurried way. In his years of teaching, Roshi had emphasized technique, discipline, focus, but his greatest wish for his students had always been that they would find this awareness of the present moment, this appreciation for life between the great events. He had seen it in Goku sometimes, when the Saiyan would pause during training to watch a butterfly or to feel the wind, a natural mindfulness that all his power and fighting ability couldn't eclipse. The strongest technique, Roshi murmured to the morning air, is complete attention. The bird flew away, and Roshi watched its path across the sky. Another moment, another gift. The day stretched before him, with no battles to fight, no world to save, just the rhythm of waves, the dance of clouds, the space between heartbeats, where all of life truly happens. And in that space, Master Roshi found not emptiness, but fullness, not absence, but presence, the quiet center from which all strength flows. Evening had returned to Master Roshi's island, completing the circle of the day. The old hermit sat on the shore, watching as the sun made its slow descent toward the horizon. Soon the first day of our story would end, though the cycle would begin again tomorrow, as it always had. Roshi had lit a small fire on the beach, its warm light a counterpoint to the fading glow of sunset. Flames danced and shadows played, reminding him of the impermanence of all things. and yet also of what endures. Have you ever thought about what remains when everything else falls away? The turtle hermit gazed into the fire, seeing in its depths memories from his long life, battles fought and won, students trained and sent into the world, quiet evenings like this one, repeated thousands of times across the centuries. In the end, he said softly to the flames, it's not the power that matters, it's the light we leave behind. He thought of his friend Goku, perhaps the strongest warrior the Earth had ever known. Yet Goku's true legacy wasn't his fighting ability. It was his kindness, his forgiveness, his childlike joy in living fully. These qualities had touched everyone around him, had changed lives, had saved worlds. In his mind's eye, Roshi could see Goku sitting by this same fire years ago, laughing at some simple joke, his face lit with happiness. That light remained, long after the specific words had been forgotten. Could it be that our truest strength lies not in what we can destroy, but in what we can nurture? The sun touched the horizon now, setting the sky ablaze with color. Roshi watched the spectacular display with the same appreciation he had felt the first time he witnessed it, centuries ago. Some wonders never grow old, never lose their power to move the heart. He thought of all those who had passed through his life, friends, students, rivals, teachers. Each had left something behind, a light that continued to shine in the world. Master Mutaito's wisdom, Grandpa Gohan's kindness, Krillin's courage, Bulma's ingenuity, Piccolo's honor, Goku's joy, and perhaps he too had left such a light, would continue to leave it in ways he might never fully know. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward like tiny stars returning to the sky. Roshi added another piece of driftwood, watching as the flames embraced it. Transformation, not ending. Change, not loss. Everything returns to where it began, he murmured, but never quite the same. As darkness settled fully around the island, the fire's glow became more pronounced, more precious, like life itself, more beautiful for its impermanence, more valued for its fragility. Master Roshi looked up at the emerging stars, feeling a profound peace. After all the training, all the fighting, all the protecting, this was the lesson that mattered most: to recognize the light in all things and in all beings, to nurture that light, to pass it on. And now, dear listener, as our first night's journey comes to a close, perhaps you can feel that same peace settling around you. Perhaps you can sense the truth that Master Roshi discovered through his centuries of life, that true power was never in the Kai, but in peace. As you drift toward sleep, carry this light with you into your dreams, the knowledge that strength comes in many forms, that the spaces between moments matter, that what we leave behind is more important than what we achieve. Rest now, gentle traveler. Let the story fade into silence, like the last embers of a fire returning to darkness, and know that tomorrow, like the sun, the journey can begin anew, different, yet somehow the same, always changing, always continuing, always returning to where it began. In the quiet of this moment, as sleep approaches, remember, not every power needs to shake the earth. Some, like kindness, like wisdom, like peace, change the world with a whisper rather than a shout. Good night, and until we meet again beside this storyteller's fire.